In 1989, there was a brand that was slowly shaping a car that, while built fundamentally wrong, was becoming an icon for its particular driving behavior. The rear-heavy car that ran off oil and angry Germans could only be driven by some of the best because the development of more power did not come at the same progression as the development of driving nannies. What we received, though, was a car that nowadays is worth both arms and both legs, but in its prime was no more than an RX-7 FC costs nowadays. Which, by the way, I'm Alex Martini with 2 underscores on Instagram, and today we're talking about how to modify the Porsche 964. Looking for car parts this tax return time? Don't buy from the big corporate bullies. Get it from us, the people who give a shit, okay? The official tagline is to mod your car at Martini Works, and Dakota's probably gonna throw a shoe at me, but you get the point. The Porsche 911 964, the official GTR car purchase after YouTubers purchased all the actual GTRs. The Porsche 964 is the car that is almost as iconic as a Ferrari Testarossa. I would say it's on par in terms of being known like the Lamborghini Countach, and likely just as revered as the R34 Nissan Skyline GTR. And while the G series that came before it looks similar, once you put on your glasses, you realize that the mouth you were about to kiss has cavities and smells weird, because the 964 had over 85% of itself being new parts over its older sibling. Now, Porsche was busy introducing all sorts of new technology during this time, after they realized trying to cut off the Porsche 911 was a bad idea, and instead, they began to embrace the flawed design as an iconic nameplate for the brand. You know this. The Porsche 964 would see things like all-wheel drive offered, electronically controlled traction systems to avoid the snap oversteer that kept happening with the previous models. You could get a 964 in your coupe, Targa, Cabrio models, and either a two-wheel drive signified by the 2 below the old whale tail, or 4 for its all-wheel drive counterpart. For people who modify cars, you'll want the 964 as it was the first 911 to truly enter the era of a chassis that felt truly different than just a Volkswagen Bug. Most importantly is the suspension. The G series, for instance, had a torsion bar system, which is easy to understand until it isn't, and nothing makes any sense when you actually look underneath there. The 964, however, had a trailing arm with a Y-stack rear axles, which pretty much means that you could throw coilovers in all sorts of easy peasy. The 3.6-liter, 250 horsepower was plenty for the small chassis, but the best part about this car, truly, is if you've been in a 911 SC, you know the air conditioning system is the equivalent of taking like a Boeing 747 from a dead stop at gate C36 to landing at the Haneda International Airport. It's a concoction of levers and systems to get the air lukewarm and smells like oil and doesn't do anything. And the 964, finally, after a billion years, Porsche figured out how to make an HVAC system. It was impossible. It was the best thing to ever come from this car. I'm not kidding. Get in a G series, look down, you'll notice all the levers. The joke will kind of make sense. Kind of. Not really, but it's close enough. And it seems like one of those silly things, but you won't care about it until you do. You also got a whole bunch of other stuff. ABS, power steering, electronic spoiler, twin spark ignition. This thing was a fancy, like, Rolodex of information and tech. Okay, for many, the 964 is the perfect example of an analog driving experience with just enough tech where driving it doesn't actually suck. The Porsche 911 964, the official car for people whose Tumblr's page would likely put them on a list. As the years progressed, rich people got bored buying Ferraris and Lamborghinis and laid their eyes on this expensive bug and said, I want it. So now most examples are $60,000 plus, and those that aren't are the Cabrio automatics and the worst spec you could possibly find, and the world is just a little bit more dreary. But if you dream like I dream, then we can dream together about how to modify one of these when we get one day. 7-ish or so years from now for $115,000, because inflation keeps happening and money's not real and nothing makes sense and everything hurts. The air-cooled flat 6 is a beauty of an engine and is an absolute treat to let breathe and have fun with. These cars are not for the faint of heart, though, in terms of the wheelbase being shorter, and the addition of power can make them easily break loose, and correcting for it requires like really good driving experience, okay? It requires like less than a 10 ping, and you and I aren't faker, okay? With most Porsches getting to an age age where nearly everything that's not made of metal needs to be replaced, the mod list may not be as exciting as you think, but the bill will be. For example, checking engine mounts is a likely replacement right out of the gate. The suspension will feel groggy and sloppy when you compare it to a new car, to which a good set of coilovers like AST or KW are a great place to switch over to. From Martini Works, of course. We'd recommend spending a good week or two just going through and checking all of your bushings, your plastic, rubber, your brake lines, things like that, which should 110% also be fixed and repaired, okay? This is just gonna make the car feel like it's actually worth the amount of money that you just spent, because it won't if you don't fix it. You'll find some awesome kits to replace all your weather stripping for about $1,500 to $2,000 as well. Yes, 4 zeros. Most of the time, people spend money with coilovers, a proper set of BBS wheels with Continental tires, tinted windows, and Adams cross-drilled and slotted rotors with some Hawk pads to make sure that you can actually brake the car. The Porsche 911 964, the official car for people who unironically wear pants too short and still somehow pull it off. Makes no sense. Can never get that right. In the engine department, you'll see cams, an Evo intake, Steve Wong chip, and a FabSpeed cat bypass system and exhaust will pretty much make this thing sing. Most of this is relatively standard. I've seen people go in and do this. They've also done like the RS pulley delete with the poly transmission mounts and even the heater delete, but that's up to you. These cars are a little finicky in the engine department, so the big thing to know here is that really start with the intake and the exhaust, and if you want to go crazier, you can. The biggest value in modifying your 964 is in the suspension department, okay? So aim for coilovers first, then jump into your brakes, lines, and rotors, then jump over to your wheels and tires, then jump into your cooling and heat exchanger talk, and then you can go into doing like a bypass valve for some added exhaust note, or replace the entire exhaust system, which is way more fun, but much more expensive. And if you want to enter the tune zone, you can. It's actually pretty easy. The Steve Wong chip I mentioned before, or FabSpeed Tuning, has something for about $800. From both, you're going to get about 30 horsepower and 28 foot-pounds of torque. Now, this is why it's a little bit more of a fancier modification list, because the other thing I'd recommend is that if you really get into driving this car, which you should, are you kidding me? This is a driver's car. You should potentially look at getting your gearing changed. When I had my G Series, it was a bit of the same situation. The 5-speed was awesome, but with the added power, you'll notice it doesn't really feel like the torque curve plays with it very well. The stock ratios just feel really far apart, and I wish I could get one that didn't have that problem. Now, I'm not a transmission expert, so you're gonna have to do your own research here, but what I can say is some people will go with the closed ratio gears to give you a little bit more pep in the 0 to 100 range at the offset of top speed. Others will just change out their 3rd, 4th, and 5th gearing for like literally $6,000. But the good news here is that you'll hear people say that it feels like you just added 100 horsepower, because apparently the OEM gearing is just not that great once you add more power. But that's kind of the double-edged sword with the Porsche 964. Everything that you want to do, it is damn expensive, and even if you take out a double mortgage to pay for the car initially, you need to pump your brakes and ask yourself, is it actually worth it? So how do you modify a Porsche 964? Like my beautiful baby Jimmy Oaks? Easy, baby. You grab $65,000 to get a Coupe Carrera 2 with a stick in the middle and pray you didn't just grenade your future IRA. From there, you'll quickly realize Renlist is your greatest friend and also your worst enemy, because nobody anywhere at any time can agree on anything like the Porsche community can. Instead, you're going to play it safe and get some H&R coilovers from Martini Works and cry as you realize that every mod is about to be just as expensive as an NA Mazda Miata. Why? Because you bought the fancy VW. You have no one to blame but yourself. From there, every plastic and rubber grommet will end up having to be like one shade away from breaking apart and needing to be repaired, and the car is going to feel heavy and it's not going to feel very connected until you let the damn thing drive and let it breathe with an intake and exhaust and headers. But once you do that, it will not matter, because when you are driving this thing that costs just as much as an Audi R8 V10, you will undoubtedly be the coolest motherfucker on the planet until you realize the seats are uncomfy and you need the Recaro plaid patterns one, the ones that are really cool and in every single 911, but they cost $4,000 a seat. It's okay. It'll all be okay. But most importantly, if you did manage to buy one, enjoy it. These are one of the greatest cars in terms of driving experience that still sits in an analog price point at a fun horsepower range that can truly be quite the experience. The community is absolutely incredible, and the Porsche experience as a whole is something that you really never look back on and regret. The unfortunate thing about the platform is that the pricing has really hit a point where you're either getting one that's either rebuilt or completely totaled, or you're spending a ton of money. And unfortunately, you need to do a lot to get the same amount of power and performance out of it as you would something that's a little bit newer. But you are buying Porsche for the nameplate. And if you do jump into it, it's kind of like a cult. you're gonna end up not ever coming back out. So if you do decide to modify your Porsche 911 964, just be sure to do it over at Martini Works. We got plenty of parts, especially in the Euro spec aisle, that are huge for this platform. And of course, if you already have one modified, add it to our build threads over at Martini Works. I'm Alex on Martini with 2 underscores on Instagram. We'll see you on the next one. Adios.